crisis breaks out, either a natural disaster or any world crisis, the first words at everyone's lips in Washington is, where is the nearest aircraft carrier? The aircraft carrier has been the mainstay of the U.S. Navy, as well as American foreign policy, for well over 60 years. Today, San Diego is home to the most remarkable aircraft carrier in naval history, the USS Midway, now decommissioned and known as San Diego's Aircraft Carrier Museum. I'm Mike Goupel, and with us today is Scott McGaugh. And Scott is the author of two best-selling books, Midway Magic and Midway Memories. Scott is also the marketing director of the San Diego Aircraft Carrier Museum. Scott, welcome to Pace TV.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you for being here. Tell us, what inspired you to get involved with this project to begin with?
Well, I tell you, it's like hundreds of San Diegans who ultimately got involved with the project. It was back in 1996 when I owned an advertising and public relations agency, and when the organizers of the project needed some help from a PR standpoint, they came to me. They asked if I would donate a few weeks volunteer time. The more I learned about the project, how important it was to San Diego, as a San Diego native, for me, a month's worth of volunteering turned into 8 years of volunteering, heading up the public relations, writing 2 books, and now I'm the marketing director on the Midway.
Wow, what a feat.
It was an odyssey. It's been a real personal odyssey and a remarkably rewarding one.
Now, speaking of odysseys, in your book, Midway Magic, you talk about the 47-year odyssey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it really is a remarkable piece of living history of the USS Midway and the odyssey that it embarked on. It was an odyssey that began a week after the end of World War II. It ended with the liberation of Kuwait in 1991. It was an odyssey that took the ship into the cross current of almost every international crisis in the latter half of the 20th century. And when you think about that, that's remarkable. Cold Wars came and went. Cuban Missile Crisis, Korea, Vietnam, Iranian hostage crises, the invasion of Kuwait. Midway was in the middle of almost every one of those crises. It was an odyssey shared by 225,000 Americans, most of them the age of 20, and ultimately became the longest-serving carrier in U.S. Navy history.
Wow. Now, as you say, the aircraft carrier Midway was commissioned after the end of the Second World War.
Yes.
Now, we have a film clip of the building of the Midway as well as the commissioning. So let's have a look at that.
All right.
CVB Battle Carrier 41 was ordered into production in August 1942. The product of the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia, the USS Midway was the lead ship of the 3 45,000-ton Midway-class CVBs. The carrier Midway was named for the important carrier battles fought on and around Midway Island between June 3rd and 6th, 1942. She was christened Midway by Mrs. B.W. Ripley II, widow of an aviator lost at the Battle of Midway on March 20th, 1945. Her commissioning was held 6 months later on September 10th, 1945. Midway was the largest warship in the world for the first decade of her service, and in 1952 was redesignated CVA Attack Carrier 41.
So the Midway was the largest aircraft in the world for a decade after it was built.
That's right. It was a remarkable feat of engineering, really.
I'll bet. Now, Scott, I understand that in your book you refer to the Midway as an aviation pioneer. In what way was that?
Well, it was really a remarkable history that Midway created almost from the moment that it was commissioned. It was really something that became known as Midway Magic throughout the Navy. It started in 1946 when Midway was the first carrier assigned to the Arctic Ocean during the winter in order to figure out how airplanes could fly among the icebergs. The Midway was able to accomplish that over the course of 2 months. Its aviators came back and taught the rest of the Navy how to fly in Arctic conditions. Only a year later, Operation Sandy in 1947, the Midway was assigned to go off the coast of Bermuda and test fire one of the captured German V-2 rockets from World War II. Because in those days, we didn't know if ships could withstand the thrust of missile warfare, missile launches. Well, Midway launched its entire air wing, was able to launch the rocket. It almost hit the USS Knox before it was blown up in midair, but it was a successful experiment. That was the dawn of naval missile warfare. And 20 years later is another example, hands-off pilot technology, the ability to land an aircraft aboard an aircraft carrier without using your hands was technology that was proven on Midway and later was used in the space shuttle program.
Wow. So the Midway was a test bed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Whenever there was
Okay.
something new and different that the Navy needed to pioneer, to prove, to document, they turned to the Midway.
Wow. Now tell us the difference between the air group and the ship's company aboard ship.
Well, Midway had a crew of 4,500 men. About 3,000 were permanently assigned to the carrier itself to operate the carrier, and then there was about 1,500 that were assigned to the air wing. Not just the pilots, but all the mechanics, the electricians, a variety of different avionics personnel that were assigned to the air wing. What made Midway different was that for most of its career, the air wing was permanently assigned to the ship, whereas in other aircraft carriers, air wings come and go. As a result, Midway developed a very tight organization, was able to accomplish things that other carriers didn't because that air wing was always part and working alongside the ship's company.
That made the big difference.
A great deal of difference, absolutely.
Now let's discuss some of the missions that the Midway performed that distinguished itself apart from the others, both combat and non-combat.
Well, people will be surprised to know that less than 10% of Midway's entire history was spent in combat. In fact, that's about average for most carriers because their primary role is one of deterrence. What other people don't realize, however, is that also humanitarian missions are a very big part of the role of the aircraft carrier. As early as 1958, Midway was off the Chinese coast during a big showdown with Chairman Mao, rescuing evacuees from Quemoy and Matsu. As recently as 1991, on its final mission, it was off the Philippines when Mount Pinatubo erupted, rescuing refugees, Air Force personnel from Clark Air Base days before it was ultimately destroyed. But perhaps the most, I think, famous humanitarian mission was Operation Frequent Wind. That took place on April 30th, 1975, which many of us viewed from the safety of our homes at 6 o'clock news when Saigon fell to the communists. We all saw those refugees being piled into helicopters in the American Embassy, taking off and heading out to sea. Most of them were headed for the USS Midway, which rescued more than 3,000 personnel in about 30 hours.
We have an excellent film clip of just what you're speaking of, that evacuation of Saigon during the Vietnamese War. So let's look at that. I find it very interesting.
Vern Jumper was air boss aboard the Midway during the evacuation of Saigon.
Now, on the 29th of April at 3:30 in the afternoon, we got the word to execute Operation Frequent Wind. Operation Frequent Wind was the evacuation of Saigon. So we started shuttling our H-53s between the ship and Saigon. In a 30-hour period, we took on 3,073 refugees. The second day out, we had another very interesting occurrence. We were launching and recovering helos in a L-19 Bird Dog aircraft. That's like a little Cessna 152. Came from out of nowhere and flew right down the flight deck at about 100 feet, and he dropped a note on the flight deck, and this note said, "Would you please move those helicopters off of your runway? I can land on your runway. I have 1 more hour of fuel. I have my wife and 5 children aboard." At that time, Captain Larry Chambers and I discussed it, and we decided initially that we would have him ditch alongside the angle. We put helos over him with SAR swimmers, put them in the water, and we'd save them that way. And we discussed it further, and we finally decided we could save the 2 adults, but we'd never save the 5 children. So Captain Chambers said, "Vern, we've got to take him aboard. Give me a ready deck." And I said, "Aye, aye, sir." I moved everything off the angle deck. We turned into the wind, a nasty rainy day. We got 30 knots of wind across the deck. I also had an interpreter in Tri-Fly, a Vietnamese interpreter, and through me, I instructed him how to land on the ship, and he came around and made a beautiful landing. We had 30 knots of wind down the deck. He touched down right in the wires. He rolled out to this first expansion joint. My flight deck crew ran out and grabbed him before he went over the angle deck. The major and his wife, South Vietnamese Air Force major and his wife, crawled out of the cockpit, came around the side, opened up the baggage compartment, out tumbled their 5 little kids, and they'd been stuffed in there for a long time. My flight deck crew just exploded in joy. It was amazing.
What a remarkable piece of film. You know, it's amazing that people can see the humanitarian aspect of aircraft carrier and warfare, for that matter.
Absolutely.
Now, we said there were, over the 47-year life of the Midway, 250,000 people served aboard that ship. That's remarkable.
It is, but that's only part of the story. You know, when Midway sailed for as long as 11 months at sea, it still holds the record for longest deployment, 327 days. It sailed at the end of a multi-ship relay race that extended out over thousands of miles because Midway had to be constantly resupplied. So supply ships were always planned to be coming alongside every couple, 3 days, about twice a week. And it took tens upon tens of thousands of other men and women in the supply chain of the Navy to keep Midway out there at the tip of the sword. There were men and women working in Mombasa and Karachi and Diego Garcia and Perth and Fremantle in the Philippines and Korea and Japan, Guam, Pearl Harbor. They were all part, indirectly, of the Midway Odyssey, and it was their hard work and dedication that made that Odyssey possible.
What a fantastic support system that is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned the city at sea. Tell us what that really means when you have a city at sea.
Well, any of your viewers who might have been raised or brought up in a small town of, say, 5,000 people, they can think back to what that small town was like. Everything in that small town was aboard Midway. There was a cinema, there were chapels, there was a laundry, there were 6 restaurants called galleys in the Navy producing 13,000 meals a day. There were electricians, welders, tailors, shoe repair, a jail, police. Virtually everything in a small town had to be aboard Midway if Midway was going to sail for as long as 11 months at a time. And it was really the captain acting as a mayor of all these different neighborhoods that made Midway Magic possible, because it was his job to see to it that all these men and all these specialties worked together so that at the end of the day, only 200 aviators could fly, because that's all that there were aboard Midway. 4,300 men worked, so 200 could fly off the flight deck of Midway.
Wow. Now, we see an example of that when we go aboard this wonderful museum.
Yes.
That you represent. It's a fantastic experience. And we have a film clip of life below decks on the Midway. And I think it'd be wonderful for our viewers to be part of that.
You bet.
Let's see what that looks like.
Okay.
Below the main deck, you will find the second and third decks. It is here that the crew found most of the services essential to life at sea. The second deck was a social center where men could be found eating, playing card games, writing letters, studying for advancement in grade, watching movies, swapping sea stories, or even getting a haircut. The third deck housed sickbay and the chaplain's offices. It is said that these decks were the main artery of the ship's infrastructure, because every member of the crew would have accessed these decks at least once a day to take advantage of the many services offered. The mess deck was a dining hall at sea. This mess deck is the largest aboard the Midway and could accommodate up to 290 sailors and Marines. More than 13,000 meals were prepared each day and served in Midway's 6 galleys. A staff of 70 operated the more than 15,000 square feet of dining and food preparation space. The task was so large that some junior personnel from other departments served as mess cooks, cleaning and setting tables for their shipmates. The galley features a full range of food preparation equipment, including convection ovens, griddles the size of picnic tables, and huge 80-gallon steam kettles. Head cook Charlie Kiefer was in charge of this galley in 1970 and 1971.
This is the most powerful hat in the United States Navy right here. The whole world operates around this hat. I'm sure that we don't satisfy each person, but if I have a sailor come down to me and get a full tray, we have a Navy ration law. All right? This law comes from Congress. This entitles each person so much food every day. And this hat is what controls all of that. All right. Now, in this galley here, we not only meet the Navy ration law, we exceed it. If the Armed Forces Recipe Card calls for an 8-ounce steak, I give them a 10-ounce steak. Plus, if they're not happy here with this galley and they don't like what's on the menu, they can go forward and get them a couple of hamburgers and cheeseburgers. 10 hours a day. Now we keep that galley open up there. So the person has a choice of eating either here, and if he's still hungry, he can still go forward and get something to eat. up there.
That was a great piece of film showing the below decks of the Midway. That piece of film was part of one of the most popular features of the museum is the audio tour.
Yes, it is. It's something that was we designed from the very beginning. You know, it took 12 years to get Midway to San Diego. It began in 1992, an effort by hundreds of San Diego volunteers. I was privileged to be part of that, play a small role. But really it took 12 years of permits and reviews and approvals before we finally got Midway to San Diego, and then we had 6 months to open Midway as a museum. We always knew that we needed to bring the Midway story alive. And the best way to do that is through the people, the young men who served on Midway, as we've seen in these clips. So therefore, the self-guided audio tour headset that comes with every admission is extremely important. It helps guests go now to as many as 58 different stops throughout the ship. And I think one of the things that really helps bring it alive is the fact that when you punch in a button for a given exhibit, you don't just hear your typical professional narrator. You often hear a Midway veteran who lived or worked or slept in that particular space. It might be a man now in his 80s who was aboard in 1945. It might be a man now in his 40s who was aboard during Desert Storm. So it really brings the Midway Magic story to life through the people who made Midway Magic.
That's wonderful. There are so many features of the museum. I know myself, when I took the audio tour, I found it remarkable because it covered every aspect of the ship in such detail.
Well, there's a lot to tell. You know, Midway has only been open a couple of years, and in fact, we are adding restored spaces and restored aircraft every couple of months. There's a lot more of the story that we do want to tell over time as we are successful and are able to reinvest our proceeds into restoration. But one of the key components, I think, of the ship, of the museum experience, is our remarkable group of storytelling docents. These are volunteers who have to go through a 40-hour course. They then get on-the-job training with another docent before they're turned loose, so to speak, on our guests, taking up different stations throughout the ship, telling stories where planes landed at the arresting gear wires, telling stories up in the island and pry fly in the bridge and out on the catapult. And many of them, in fact, are former Midway veterans, which I know you can appreciate having served on Midway just a few years ago. And that really helps, I think, bring the story to life in a very personal way so that everyone, not just men who might be interested in naval aviation, but women, older people, younger people, find it, I think, a story that really touches them, that defines courage and compassion. And I think that's been a big part of our success is the self-guided audio tour and the docents.
I'm sure of that. Now, we have one more clip showing the living spaces aboard the ship. Now, you have 4,500 people that have to have a place to sleep on one ship.
Yes.
Now, that is a remarkable feat to begin with.
Well, it is. There are, in fact, 4,500 beds on Midway. Even more amazing, there are only 3 in which you can get out of both sides of the bed. In other words, that they are real beds. The admiral, the captain, and the captain's executive officer, the XO, all had regular style beds that you and I are familiar with. Everyone else on the ship, no matter how senior they were, how many years they had put in the Navy, slept in bunk beds, usually 3, sometimes 4 high.
Well, let's give our viewers a little glimpse of life aboard the Midway when it comes to sleeping arrangements.
You bet.
Moving about the ship was a task in itself. Miles of passageways connect over 2,000 compartments within the ship. The use of colored tiles in these passageways help denote different areas of the ship. Blue tile represents officer country, while a white eagle or star indicated the reserved areas for the captain or admiral. Many of these passageways pass through walls in the ship called bulkheads and have watertight doors and hatches to seal off compartments. Some of these watertight doors are low-hanging and have knee knockers coming up from the deck, requiring you to crouch and high step at the same time. Living spaces for officers and enlisted men are spread throughout the ship. When built in World War II, the Midway was the largest carrier in the world, even though she could originally house more than 3,700 men. Over time, the ship's company would grow to over 4,500 men. These bunks, or berths, were standard for enlisted personnel. Each sailor had only 6 cubic feet of storage under his mattress in the coffin locker. and less than 3 cubic feet in a standing locker. Military organizations are hierarchical by nature, and living standards and benefits increase with greater responsibility and rank. Junior officers' quarters served as home to junior officers, typically ensigns and lieutenants junior grade. Most junior officers were recent college graduates just beginning their naval careers. Junior officer berthing was more spacious and comfortable than the enlisted berthing, and included amenities such as writing desks and built-in shower. Even within the bunk room itself, rank had its privileges. The lower your seniority, the closer your bunk was to the door and high traffic areas. With very few exceptions, showers aboard the Midway employed a manually operated self-closing shower nozzle to preserve fresh water. The Navy shower involved using a blast of water to get damp. Then the sailors soaped up and finally rinsed with another blast of water. Water pressure often seemed to fail in the middle of an already short shower.
The crew morale on Midway was always extraordinary. There were several factors that contributed to that extraordinary morale. Certainly it started with the leadership. We had great master chiefs, senior chiefs, great department heads, and they set the tone. But also, and this is a factor that no other ship and air wing had, is we all were together all the time. The ship was based in Yokosuka, the shipyard was there, the air wing team was right up the street in Atsugi. The air wing and ship melded together, they knew each other, and we had a mission to perform, a mission that was first responders in the Western Pacific. No other carrier had that task. We were the always on ready to go carrier. The Midway crew felt that, the leadership understood that. They also understood that the 19-year-olds, which made up 90% of the crew, were the most important asset we had, and we made sure that we took care of them to the best we could.
Well, that was some endorsement. That pretty much sums up what the Admiral said. It pretty much sums up about what made the Midway so special and so distinctive.
Absolutely, and it's really appropriate that it would come from Admiral Mixon, who was captain of the Midway during the 1980s, so he really knew whereof he spoke.
Now, we haven't got too much time left, Scott, but I'd like you to tell us as much as you can about the other features of the museum and all the information people would need to know about visiting the museum, becoming members, etc.
You bet. My pleasure. Well, there's a lot to do on board Midway. We have 2 different kinds of flight simulators. One is a motion simulator where you actually fly a mission in Desert Storm. Another one's more of a stationary kind of a simulator. They're both extremely popular. We have a fantail cafe, so there's plenty of selections of sandwiches and salads and that sort of thing, and certainly a gift shop. A lot of folks enjoyed taking home a piece of Midway. Last year we had a lot of people come just to do their Christmas shopping at the gift shop. So that's something that's very important. Equally important, and perhaps more so, is we are constantly adding elevators up to the flight deck, down to the second deck, so that senior citizens, those in wheelchairs, the handicapped, have an opportunity to see as much of the aircraft carriers we can possibly make accessible to them. And for those who can't get to all the different spaces, we constantly have on the hangar deck rather, a video tour running of those spaces that require a little more effort to get to and they're a little more difficult to reach. So that we try to make it so that everyone in the family, young and old, can see as much of the carrier as they possibly can.
That's great.
We also work very hard to make it as accessible from a day-to-day standpoint. The museum's open 10 to 5 daily, 363 days a year. We're open only Thanksgiving and Christmas do we close. And we also work hard to make it as affordable as possible. The admission is $15 for adults. For seniors and military, there's a discount to $10. For youth 6 to 17, it's $8 free. Under the age of 6, active duty in uniform is free as well, and the self-guided audio tour is always part of every admission. I would also suggest or want to point out that Midway's location has been a big factor in its success. We worked very hard to get that Navy Pier location at 910 North Harbor Drive. We're only a couple blocks from the Santa Fe Depot and bus stops as well as the trolley stops. So it's worked out very well, not just for the locals, residents here in San Diego, but those coming off the cruise ships, those visiting San Diego. It's become a major new visitor and tourist destination. It's a big part of our success so far.
Now, you have a lot of community-related special events that go on the Midway, don't you?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We average 5 or 6 evening events a week on Midway for conventions, fundraisers, dances, that sort of thing. So a typical day on Midway, we arrive at 7, clean up, open at 10. We'll have 3,000 or 4,000 people come aboard, close at 5, set up 6 o'clock, 6:30. Another 1,000 people will come aboard for a private dinner. They'll be there till 11. We'll clean up until 3 a.m. the next morning. We go dark for just 4 hours and start again the next day.
Wow,
so it's a very busy place. Not to speak of our education programs where we have field trips and students coming aboard almost every day. And we also have a youth sleep aboard program, a sleepover program, where youngsters have an opportunity to sleep in those enlisted berths we've just seen, sample real Navy chow, and get a real taste of what it's like to be part of Midway Magic.
That's got to be great for some youngster who has aspirations about joining the Navy and be able to experience just those things.
Absolutely. It's an extremely popular program, and we're looking at adding more Fridays and Saturday nights to the calendar so that more groups can come aboard.
We haven't got much time, Scott, left. I know that you have great aspirations for the museum in itself in the future, but I want to encourage everyone, all of our viewers, if you want to see what a wonderful ship and a piece of history, by all means, stop at the Midway. Scott, I can't thank you enough
My pleasure.
for being part of this today, taking
Thank you,
time out of your busy schedule to be with us, to share your experiences.